Hello and welcome to the HackerNoon podcast. Today we have two special guests with us. Mark Helfman, who is one of HackerNoon's top writers on Bitcoin and blockchain technologies. He's written two books on the subject matter. One of them is called Consensusland and the other one is called Bitcoin or Bust. Check them out. We will drop the links in the description below. And he also has a day job at the American government. We would not be going into those subjects. We'd be sticking strictly to Bitcoin. Joining us from the other side of the fence, although he told us before this meeting that he is not exactly on the other side, but he is sitting on the fence. He is Jason Knight. He is the host of One Night in Product, and he also serves as the head of product at Black Swan Data. He's based out of England, and he also has a background in full stack development. Without wasting much time, let's get further to it. Hi, Mark. Hi, Jason. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. It's great to be on here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. And Mark, you are also a Noonies nominee, and the votings are just about to close, and you have our best wishes. I voted for you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's an honor to be nominated.
I don't know what that is, but I'll vote for you if I can.
Definitely. So Noonies is HackerNoon's annual technology awards that we do. Mark is nominated for the writer of the Bitcoin standards. But yeah.
So again, worthy. We're not worthy.
We'll find out soon enough. So, Jason, you have your skepticisms around Bitcoin, and without trying to make you into a convert of sorts, we don't expect to turn you into one of the Bitcoin maximalists that we see on Twitter. But we would like to know from you, what is it about Bitcoin that you already understand? Let's start there.
That's an open question with bells on. Yeah, I think, as I said before we started, I've obviously got. I'm definitely not an expert in Bitcoin or blockchain or any of the other cryptocurrencies, but I've done a bit of reading around, and I've definitely been following things as they develop. And I'm a technical guy, so I'm interested in technology. I think the thing with Bitcoin is it's not like I'm just like one of these people that's just going to sit there and slag off or slate people that either hold Bitcoin or like that believe in it, because ultimately I'm actually pretty fine with the underlying concept. The idea of having money that you can send to people that gets to them without government interference and super smart contracts that you can take legal lawyers and stuff out of the way. In theory, that's a fantastic idea. The problem that I have of it so far is there's kind of three use cases I see for Bitcoin and associated technologies. Obviously, Bitcoin itself. So Bitcoin is a currency, but also Bitcoin is a kind of a speculative or kind of store of value, and kind of almost like an investment thing, which is fine, but kind of those two things seem to be fighting each other a little bit, certainly at the moment. Then obviously there's things like blockchain for business, which I just find peculiar, I will say, and I'm happy to be taken to task on that. But it seems that a lot of the kind of blockchain for business kind of hyperledger stuff just seems a bit different to what I'd expect. And I work in product. My job is to work out the best way to solve a problem, irrespective of the solution. I just want to deliver something that's good for my users, and not fall in love with solutions. And to me, it feels like, from a product perspective, that something like business blockchain just feels a bit overkill and not necessarily the answer. But again, happy to be corrected on that. And also then just the smart contract thing as well. It's like, I've done a bit of reading on smart contracts. Again, the concept makes sense. If this, then that, and automatic processing of orders. But there just seem to be so many ways that could go wrong that it just feels like something that I'd never want to put into one of my products. And that would be something I'd be happy to be corrected on. And like I said in the Twitter chat before this started, it's like, if you can get me, putting 3 or 4 dApps onto onto Ethereum by the end of this, then you'll have done your job really well.
Wouldn't that be a job for everyone, right?
There you go. No, the big reveal will be at the end where it turns out I'm Satoshi Nakamoto at the end, right?
Wouldn't that be a big reveal? But yeah, going back to what you said about Bitcoin as to whether it is speculative, it is hoarded, and it is used for transferring value, isn't it very similar to what you already have with fiat? So, what are the reservations apart from the fact that no government backs it, but the actual people back it up?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. Again, I don't have any objections to people holding things that have value. I don't really understand why people hold gold, apart from that it's someone said that it's worth some money and it costs some money to get it out of the ground. I guess the difference with gold is that you could make a nice ring out of it if you had to, whereas obviously with Bitcoins, the Bitcoin is it's like you can't do anything with it apart from use it as a Bitcoin. But again, I don't have any particular argument against people holding things as a kind of investment, because ultimately if people think that something has value, then that's absolutely fine. I think obviously one of the reasons I probably wouldn't like to hold so much Bitcoin, or certainly historically, has been the massive fluctuation in the price. Now, that's not Bitcoin's fault. Don't get me, that's the speculator's fault, but it's still something that makes it feel particularly unstable. You know, I actually tried to buy some Bitcoin, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years ago now, whenever the last big bubble was, like when it looked like it was going on the up. Now, as it turned out, it's probably lucky that my bank refused to let me buy Bitcoin, because that's what happened. You know, they came up with a fraud check or something and said that I couldn't do it. So I couldn't get the Bitcoin, and then I gave up on the idea. And actually, I think Bitcoin crashed not long after that. So I actually saved a lot of money at that point. But at the same time, it feels like that in itself is a problem from an investment perspective, but it's also a problem from a spending it perspective, because ultimately, if I want to spend Bitcoin, I want to know that by the time that transaction has been approved or put onto the blockchain, that the price hasn't fluctuated so much that I need to either send another one, or I don't 100% know how that works. What happens if you say to me, actually, I want $100 worth of Bitcoin, and I send you that, but then it changes halfway through? What happens? Do I send you more? Do I do? Yeah, I don't know what the argument is for that.
Got it. Mark, what are we doing
Yeah.
wrong? How are we not able to get the smart people to start transacting in Bitcoin? We've seen people going from one end of South America to the other, transacting only in Bitcoin. And then I hear the kind of skepticism that I would expect from my mom, and not from people working in product, not from people who are people who are full stack developers. What are we doing wrong?
I think one of the things that is, I think, sometimes miscommunicated or not well established among even people who are really like Bitcoin Maximalists, people really into this thing.
Amen.
Is with all the focus on currency and the money and the monetary policy, people say, oh, it's scarce. There are a lot of reasons that people really feel strongly about the monetary system that Bitcoin runs on.
Mm-hmm.
People forget to really, the key innovation is that this is an open and permissionless financial network.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody can patch in anytime. Anybody can build anything using Bitcoin as the settlement layer for whatever they want to exchange. And that is something that is new, novel, unique, and has never existed before. You're starting to get to the point where there are enough developers who understand the technology, enough money coming into the market that is not speculative, but looking to build and develop on top of Bitcoin, to use this open permissionless financial network, the code that runs it, and the community of people who have already started to grow and around it to create real applications. And a lot of these things, they're beta, they're small, they need a way to go. Think about any startup, it could take a decade before anybody even knows about these things. And then it's the biggest thing. It's, oh my God, where were you all my life? These guys have been working for 10 years to make it to that point. They worked 10 years to become an overnight sensation. And so you now have these new applications that are going to bring a lot of people in, maybe even without knowing that they're using Bitcoin and without exposing them to the speculation. Strike Wallet, for example. And I'm not plugging anything. I don't have any interest. Nobody sponsored any of these things, but these are things where I know, and in some cases I know people who worked on these products. Strike Wallet, for example, which uses a payment layer built off of Bitcoin to send money instantly for virtually free to anybody, anywhere. And what it does is it pegs the transaction to your local currency, so you never have to worry about fluctuation in Bitcoin. OpenNode is designed more for, so that's more of a consumer app, and OpenNode is another, it's another service that is more focused on the merchant class and being like a competitor to Square. Square is now figuring out how it can use Bitcoin to enhance its service too. And the value of using Bitcoin as a settlement layer is precisely because it's fully accessible, unlike what's happening in fintech and anywhere else, where you have the same solutions, but they don't have that massive network. They don't have that free settlement layer. They don't have the ability for anybody to just patch in. There's still a guy who has a database or product or business around it that then needs to be marketed and built out. So that's, I think, where we're going wrong, because the money is really compelling to, I think, a lot of people who are in that old wave of people who first found out about Bitcoin because they thought, oh, I hate central banks, so now this is going to be my new money.
Yeah.
And when you get in that realm, it's, I don't think that the messages necessarily are compelling to people who don't already believe that. Whereas the idea that I have an app that makes my life easier, for example, like my newsletter, Crypto is Easy. When I started, I would give people Bitcoin as a thank you for signing up, and it was free. Stripe, any other payment service, I'll use Stripe because they're best known. Stripe, not Stripe, because they're best known. They're the back end payment system for a lot of online commerce. Those guys, not only do I need to make sure that I don't run afoul of their rules, which I accidentally did, not out of any, I'm happy to, they were great, they worked with me on it, but I didn't have to worry about that. I didn't have to pay the charges that Stripe charges, and I could send it to literally everybody that I wanted to. And because I use what they call SegWit, which is, it's a much cheaper way to send Bitcoin. I didn't have to worry about, oh, $5 to send $5. No, it was not even close to that. So that's, I think, where the barrier is in terms of the awareness that you're talking about and making people understand and really appreciate what this is. And because we have a lot of people who are now working on solving that with consumer products, merchant products, these are like mainstream, these are products that are designed to be used in a mainstream environment, while mitigating a lot of the risks that people see. Oh, Bitcoin's up, Bitcoin's crashed, Bitcoin this, Bitcoin. That is, I think, where we're going, and where we're going wrong is this massive emphasis on, it's a very compelling message to a very small number of people, this massive emphasis on the monetary policy of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, and I think I mentioned this when I was talking on my episode about it, was like, there's this whole kind of theory that it's almost like a libertarian dream. Let's just do away with governments. Everyone's gonna be their own bank, and like when civilization collapses, it's all gonna be fine. And to be fair, what Mark just said, whilst obviously I have no particular knowledge of most of those applications so far, I'm 100% all in for, if anything makes people's lives easier. That's basically my job, is to make people's lives easier. And I think I agree that if you have a solution which is all about just effectively the underlying tech and trying to persuade people that you're completely changing the universe because of this new thing that does this and that, that doesn't resonate pretty much probably with anyone. It does resonate with some people, but that's not a mass market. That's not a mass market pitch. That's something that tech nerds like us are going to be interested in. That's not something that my mum's going to be interested in, or your mum. As you said earlier, I resisted the temptation to put on a mum voice at that point, but I think also, so I mean, actually, Mark, one of the things you said was around, like, effectively what I'm hearing is almost like the Lightning Network type approach, where you have the off-chain stuff that gets put back on the chain, just because obviously Bitcoin does have a transaction speed problem, effectively, right? For mass market adoption, and that's what these things like SegWit and Lightning and all these other things are supposed to take care of, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know how far they've progressed. And I know that, for example, Lightning, I read, had some issues, potentially security holes or like vulnerabilities. As everything has vulnerabilities, I guess the vulnerabilities are less fun when you have an immutable store of things that can't, and no kind of recompense. And I guess from my perspective, it feels if I'm spending money and I muck it up somehow, because I'm getting older, so maybe I will start sending money to the wrong people by mistake, or maybe a business will go bust or something like that, and I want to get that money back. Now, in day-to-day life, I have protection. I have protection from the government. I have protection from financial schemes in my country, and I'm assuming you have those in the US and other countries too. But without that, it feels like there's a risk. Maybe a small risk, but it still feels that there's a risk, and something that would probably hit adoption amongst more kind of conservative, small c conservative people.
Got it.
But is that true? If I send someone, I know that if I send someone money on any crypto network, if I screw it up, I've basically got no chance unless they're really nice, and not everyone is.
That's true. And I gave the same argument to someone, and I was told that one of the properties of money is that you can lose it.
Yeah.
So, for example, even if it is fiat, if your pocket gets picked, that is very similar to sending money to a wrong address. I would give you my example. I have to pay people based in Ukraine, people based in Pakistan, which is like India's Arab-Israeli war thing. So there are problems over there, but when I use Bitcoin, it takes me a total of 30 minutes max to send it. I do not use Lightning Network. So whenever I hear talks about the Bitcoin blockchain being slow and stuff like that, I haven't seen that in practice at least.
So I was reading a story about a guy who, I think he was one of the first pubs in the UK. So that basically started taking Bitcoin kind of over the counter. I think, frankly, the guy that ran the pub was a bit of a kind of a geek sort of hacker himself. So I guess that was cool for him. And I think, I don't know if it's the same now. What is it, like a new block every 10 minutes or something like that? So it is slower. It's not necessarily slow compared to a wire transfer or something like that. But say, for example, if I went and bought a pint in a pub and sent them 0.001 of a Bitcoin or whatever for that pint, I either have to wait at least 10 minutes to get that approved, or they have to trust me. And the whole point.
I also feel, I understand. I also feel like sometimes the way people try to use Bitcoin is not really ideally the way you want to use it. It's if you go back to the 1870s and you said, "Oh, hey guys, look, I got this cool thing. It's a current internal combustion engine. It's awesome. It's like it's heavy. So we'll put it on a cart, okay? We'll put it on a cart, but you can bring that cart around, power stuff anywhere. It's awesome.
Yeah.
You just need some oil." And people were like, "Oh, that's really cool. Oh, I'm going to light a lamp by plugging it into the internal combustion engine." And it's, yeah, you could do that, but you're probably better off in just putting a drive chain on that cart and a seat, and now you got an automobile. Yep. You're better off maybe seeing if you can boost the power to put it in a railroad engine instead of a steam engine. And that's the way. Yeah, I do feel like sometimes using Bitcoin at a pub is getting a big tank of I don't know what you have. It's propane here. I don't know if it's kerosene or something, but like getting a big propane tank to stick a candle on top. Yeah. It's like, you could do that, but that's not the ideal use for propane. So I understand where you're coming from. I totally understand where you're coming from. I also feel like it's focusing on the bad use case rather than appreciating the good use case.
No, I agree. But then obviously also at the same time, one of the big things originally with Bitcoin was like banking the unbanked, right? Now, obviously banking the unbanked can mean, for example, that someone in rural India can send money to their relatives anywhere in the world without having to worry about the fact that there's not a bank for 500 miles or something. Yeah, that's
not
really
true,
good.
by the way.
I've no
I live in
idea.
India. I live in
Yeah.
India.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how far apart the banks are in India. I
But
must
it's
admit.
okay.
But no, I've flown over India. I went to Hyderabad a few years back from Mumbai, and there was a lot of open area between
Yeah.
Mumbai and Hyderabad. So maybe the numbers were wrong, but the point is that if someone is living in the middle of nowhere, wherever they are in the world, and
Mm.
they don't have ready access to a bank, and one of the big points of Bitcoin was you can originally, and I think even in the white paper was, we can open this up to the world. And that's
Mm-hmm.
by the way, that's a fantastic idea. Don't get me wrong. That's a great kind of goal. And if we're saying that when we say that, we mean things like bigger transactions and sending chunks of money around in a non-time sensitive manner, then again, I'm all for that. And if we're saying that, in the short term, Bitcoin isn't something that you'd actually use as day-to-day cash to buy day-to-day things, and maybe one day we do that with Lightning or some other side chain thing or whatever, then again, that's fair enough. It's just, I guess the problem with when you say banking the unbanked, or that Bitcoin is a currency, both of which are in some ways true. At the same time, it feels like they're too sweeping to not have people
Mm.
expect to do all of those things. But yeah.
Got it.
But how much of that is projecting an outcome that maybe is too far ahead of us?
And that's the thing. Again, I'm in product, so I'm all about sort of experimentation and iteration and MVPs and stuff like that. And if we're saying that this is effectively the MVP of a currency that will one day be better for other use cases that we can't do very well yet, then again, I'm not anti that. It's just I'm anti people saying it like that, if that makes sense. And again, this is a Bitcoin maximalism, right? It's like people that come out there and say that basically Bitcoin is going to solve everything tomorrow.
Yeah.
And obviously it's not going to do that. And probably they don't even believe that it's going to do that. But that's what some people are trying to tout this as. And if we're saying that this is effectively for now, like a better way, for example, to do transfers internationally or to different parts of the country or whatever, to take out the middlemen and to democratize money on a macro scale for bigger transfers that don't need to be immediately verified, then I'm all in. It's just we need to make that clear.
No, definitely. And if you try to compare it for a lot of other things because of the coronavirus and COVID
Yep.
19, a lot of us are working remote. I hire a lot of freelancers, and companies such as those, they charge up to a 20% of the fees.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm trying to outsource my work, it is like these are small odd jobs like $10 things, $20 things, and 20% of that really hurts the guy who
Mm-hmm.
is doing that. But if I pay them in like Bitcoin, the actual fee is very small. Like it's in cents, very like much smaller than the 20% that those guys would have charged. So it
Mm-hmm.
makes sense from an economic standpoint as well. Speed has like already been there because if I want to transfer money from one nation to the other, I guess I don't know of any other way to do it faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, I don't want to give PayPal my bits of money. Of course I don't.
Exactly. I used to not.
It's
Yeah.
just, I guess, yeah, one of the biggest sticks that people hit Bitcoin with is that it's not scalable because of the hash rate and the block size and stuff like that. And yeah, these are true, let's face it. But at the same time, if we're saying that that's okay for now, then that's fine. It's just someone needs to tell some of the more chest beating Bitcoin maximalists that that's the case, and to maybe keep quiet until they've worked that bit out, because I don't know, it doesn't feel like
Good
yeah.
luck.
But no, like
That's
I mean,
not gonna. There's a reason we're on this podcast, and those guys are, getting a million hits
Doing the real
every time they
thing.
speak. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, look, don't
know your audience.
But no, I don't know the current state of Lightning Network, like if that's actually been rolled out properly yet, or if that's still a POC. I understand the concept, and I think it makes a lot of sense in many ways. And if that's something that can work, then it will obviously answer some of the scaling questions. And I know that other Bitcoin Cash and stuff obviously has it's a bit faster. I think Ethereum's a bit faster. Ripple's way faster, but totally different. There's obviously ways to do it. It's just whether those are actually ready for prime time is something, I guess, to be confirmed. But also, obviously, off the back of that, there's the kind of the elephant in the room, which is the kind of at the moment the kind of the energy consumption and the kind of the general kind of inefficiency of certainly Bitcoin. Now, obviously, people will then come back to you and say, "Oh, mining gold is inefficient and mining diamonds is inefficient." And of course, that is 100% true. We probably shouldn't do that either. But at the same time, we are spending quite a lot of money solving useless mathematical puzzles. And I understand why we have to solve the mathematical puzzles to keep the systems secure. But at the same time, we're burning a lot of coal to do that. And that doesn't feel 100% great, especially these days. Greta Thunberg would not be happy. And maybe if she listens to this one day, we want to give her some kind of reason to believe that this is a good thing.
Definitely.
That's a good point. One of the things, though, about that, it is valid. There are some elements of that argument that I think are important to address. The first one being that right now, and I wish I had oh man, if I can find the report, I'll bring it to you. Over the past few years, as Bitcoin mining has become more professional, you've seen a real big shift of miners, and we're talking big miner farms, not the guys who you put a miner in their garage, which you can't do anymore. You can't as an individual miner. But these are big mining farms, and what they are doing is they have shifted to 100% renewable energy sources, including a farm in Texas that is working with oil companies. There's this gas that runs off. Like I said, I'll follow up with you on the details, but there's this runoff gas that's usually just wasted. Well, they're using it to power Bitcoin mining farms. And I think that's just one of those things where the market will drive efficiency wherever it needs to go. And if polluting energy sources are less efficient than non-polluting energy sources, that's where the market will go, just like it will with everything. The other thing about the energy consumption is, and you've acknowledged that it has a value in terms of, because you need to find some way to secure the network. It just so happens that the choice that Bitcoin's developers decided to use is massively wasteful in terms of energy. But that's also not something that most people are going to ever think about. Because if the value of Bitcoin and the utility and the usage of these things that are being built is valid at all, like any non-zero value, people just generally, and this is not a good thing about humans, but people generally don't care about what the economists would call the negative externalities. We just don't care as people. We should. I'm sure we should. Yeah, Greta says we should. A lot of people say we should, but in practice we don't. So I don't think that's really going to make a difference. It should make a whole hill of beans, but I don't think it's going to make a whole hill of beans.
Yeah, I guess you don't need to mine stuff to use it. So I think you're right that, again, if we put an app with a mash here button for my mum, she would mash there to send the money. She doesn't necessarily have any better understanding of how that money's being produced than any other money. It's not, and that's, from a user perspective, fine. But it does feel that, kind of, as the more technically savvy amongst people of the world like us, that we should potentially look to make that not the case. And I agree that end users aren't going to care about that, but it feels that we should care about that. And it feels like Bitcoin maximalists should care about that. And also, frankly,
and it's certainly I was to your point. It's certainly, and if you really care about mass adoption and having this thing be something where people can feel good about it, you don't want it to be massively wasteful. That's the last thing you want.
And there are arguments that you could make, because there are a lot of intermediaries over there. I don't know whether there are any studies which have captured the amount of carbon that all of these banks are like letting off. You don't know that. And once, hopefully, like in our lifetimes, if we have mass Bitcoin adoption, those banks are going to be shut down. The Western Unions and the PayPals of the world are going to go out of business. Those server farms are not going to consume any of any of the energy that they are doing right now. I don't know like what would the net effect be. It might be positive, it might be negative, but at the end of the day, things might even out. Maybe I believe is that all of these talks about Bitcoin being highly energy intensive is not the kind of conversation that we would be having 5 or 10 years down the line. Probably because we would have better energy resources, or probably we would have more like efficient machines.
Yeah, but actually, I think that's an interesting point about the banks as well. And this is something that Mark touched on in one of his books, Bitcoin or Bust, is the banks aren't going to go bankrupt because banks have made their living by not going bankrupt. So the banks are going to do quite a lot of them already trying to get in the game, right?
Mhm.
It's like well, they're not going to go bankrupt. They're just going to try and own the game. Now, they may not be able to own the game, but they do
Right.
have a lot of money and a lot of expertise and a lot of experience in trying to own games. Now, obviously, if there's a lot of Bitcoin, you know, kind of mining pools and stuff around the world, probably outside of the grasp of these people, and maybe
Mm.
they can't own the game. But I'm sure they're going to try. And as Mark has put in his book, Wall Street are definitely going to try, and every other kind of financial authority around the world is eventually going to try, and it's going to start to become more difficult, surely, to actually to operate as this kind of external currency because, yeah, sure, it in and as of itself, Bitcoin is something that is that you have immutable tokens, and only say Mark and I can access our own tokens if we have them.
Mm.
No one can force us to take those away from us unless they kick our door down and put a gun to our head or something. But then in some countries that could happen.
Yeah,
So
it
it's
happens.
so it's again I agree with the concept and hopefully it gets better, but there also seems to be this underlying kind of concept of we're going to beat the banks and we're going to beat the governments, and banks and governments are really good at not getting beaten, and that is a
It's
concern.
yeah, it's not about the banks going bankrupt. It's about those office spaces and the energy that they are already consuming. Those would be scaled back. In my
Yeah.
like where I live, banks have already like started scaling back. Now we don't so like now we do not see all of those big branches that we used to see because everybody has a mobile phone
Mm-hmm.
and an internet connection. So maybe once we become more efficient, the energy consumption goes down. But I would like let Mark lead this side of the conversation. He has this huge section in the book about why the governments and the banks are going to own this thing.
mm.
Mark, what do you think happens when the government says, okay, Bitcoin, we are in? I'm talking about CBDCs.
So CBDCs, there are a few different technologies to do that. I don't know how much of those technologies are really going to necessarily compete with cryptocurrency. Obviously, if they do legitimately just adopt some cryptocurrency, I think,
It's not gonna
ironically,
happen.
Vladimir, that's what I was saying. Vladimir Putin, I think, said it best, and maybe I'm misquoting him, but he said something like, no cryptocurrency could be a national
Yeah,
currency, then it wouldn't be a cryptocurrency.
crypto guy.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it goes, but there's a real competitive disadvantage. And that's what I was talking about in terms of these open permissionless attributes that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have. That's a massive competitive disadvantage. And it's very similar to how publishers and had to compete with the internet, where they're fighting with two hands behind their back and their legs tied together,
Yeah.
because there's no way to be so nimble with the traditional drivers of profit and growth in an environment where anybody can open up a laptop, create a cryptocurrency, create an app, create software, release it on global scale, and have hundreds of thousands of people ready to access it. But they'll try. And I think there's a lot that can happen between where we are today and that future that we envision, a whole lot that can happen. It's going to be really interesting to see how it goes. But I think people within Bitcoin maybe don't appreciate the risks that Governments wouldn't necessarily ban it. What they'd say is they pass a law that says, for example, if you have a cryptocurrency wallet, it has to be registered with a licensed regulated custodian.
Yeah.
Something like, or that's one example, but something like that where it's just a regulatory thing. Perhaps there's even a global consortium that arises at some point. The World Trade Organization. There are a lot of these things and there's a national compact that says there will be no use of cryptocurrency allowed, permissioned, without people authenticating themselves. And then people, as a habit, will do those things because entrepreneurs are going to make it easy for them to comply, and they're not going to want to take the risk. These are all hypothetical things because the technology is going to move forward at what I think is going to be a pretty brisk pace. There's a lot of stuff going on that's not making the news that is really significant. And governments are always going to be catching up. And then you have these guys in between. I appreciate, Jason, I appreciate you bringing up Bitcoin and bust. That was a really nice summary of the theme and one of the conflicts that I think we have right now is there's going to be those guys in between who are really savvy. They understand finance, they know people, and they have the money, they have the connections to steer this whole evolution of the technology, the industry, the laws, and the regulations in their favor, not ours.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like, again, if we go back to Utsav, my mother's their ability or inability to use Bitcoin, nothing's going to stop my mum using Bitcoin more than it being hard to use, because either the government of UK, let's imagine they pass some draconian law that says anyone caught using Bitcoin is going to jail. Now, I'm sure they're not going to do that. Stranger things have happened, right? Now, that's not going to stop some people using Bitcoin because, of course, the point of Bitcoin is that you can send stuff and the government can't tell. Certainly going to stop shops being able to take it. It's going to stop it being used as a general usage currency. And that's where this whole, going back to the kind of libertarian dream thing, it's like the government can get in your grill if it really wants to. And I guess that's the point. It's like, so again, I'm sure that government would far rather just take a slice off the top if they could. I'm sure they wouldn't want to ban money because they can just, they can put a punitive tax. Yeah, no, but they can put like a punitive tax on it or something. Like they could say all Bitcoin transactions that go through legal channels, effectively, back to Mark's point about sort of registration or whatever, anything that goes through a legal channel is subject to a 25% tax or something like that, and then they'll take the money. That is a thing they could do, and maybe even would do. And maybe even if I was a government, maybe it's something I should do if I was terrified of these things. So that's the way that governments can fight back on this kind of more, again, libertarian ideal of, we're going to bypass government, because the government's still there and it knows you're trying to bypass it. And people have been trying to bypass the government for hundreds or thousands of years, and the government's still going to find its ways, or it's going to try to find its ways to make your life hard.
That brings us back to the reason why a lot of people became Bitcoiners in the first place. The way that you have just explained it, that basically says that I am not the owner of the value that I create. The government is, because the government can tax it, the government knows what I do with it and everything. And when it comes to Bitcoin, I am the owner of the value that I generate. The government can try to regulate it, but technically it cannot. It's a lot like torrents.
Gun to head.
You cannot have like guns to head in the kind of democracies that you and I live in, right? We have Stranger Things, like we have seen them. Agreed. But I don't see that happening. Like, we all live in a libertarian democracy of sorts, all of us, like, thankfully. But yeah, that is the way, like, that is the reason why a lot of people became Bitcoiners in the first place. They want to own the value that they create. They don't want governments telling you. But yes, taxes are necessary. As one of the founding fathers of like the US said, debt and taxes are always going to be there. I might be paraphrasing, but that's what he meant. So yeah, that will be there. But moving on, Mark, I have a question for you, which brings us to the reason why a lot of people do not trust Bitcoin. First, because it is trustless. So you cannot trust a trustless system. And two, it's about the security issues. On one day, we hear about the 51% attack. As
Hmm.
soon as we learn what that means, now we have to contend with something called a Sybil attack. When we understand what a Sybil attack means, we are talking about something called the parity hack or whatnot. How do you get people like my mom to trust a system that does not give the impression that they know what they are doing? With fiat money, it's very simple. Government, like money printer goes burr. It's very easy to understand. How do I explain these things to my mom? Like, mom, a 51% attack can take away your money.
Oh man. All right,
No,
that's above
you
my
can
pay
take this one,
grade.
Mark.
Oh my God. I don't know. I don't want to be cynical about humans. I don't think it's going to take much convincing. You just put some Bollywood guys up there. They say, "Hey, I use Bitcoin." No, I'm serious. I hate to be cynical about it, but I don't. I'm not as keen to what's going on in the UK. Steph Curry goes. I don't know. Do you guys know Steph Curry is the big basketball player?
Yeah.
Madonna. I don't even know who like Bruno Mars or somebody. It just goes on and says, "Hey, I use Bitcoin. I vouch for it. It's easy. You're all good." And then that's it. So the
Remember?
more people you have who are just normal people who just use it, advocate for it, talk to it, and these are people that
Mm,
are trusted. And more and more of these, like every day, there's another person who like, oh, they're doing Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And just more and more of those people who that you trust the people, you trust the message, and you
mhm,
don't think about the technology. That's really the impediment. But the technology has a long way to go before people who understand the risks
mhm,
will necessarily feel comfortable. Part of that is just people are risk averse. Part of that is if if you don't appreciate how to assess the risk, how do you quantify that risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
51% attack is purely hypothetical.
Yeah.
mhm,
It's a realistic attack vector, but it's it's like being worried about nuclear war, which would be
mhm.
terrible. It would be horrible. Is it
Yeah.
likely? No. And
Not
let's hope it
really.
stays that way. But it's
Mm,
possible, and there is no government on earth that doesn't have a contingency for nuclear attack. That doesn't
mhm.
plan for what are we going to do if Donald Trump falls on the red button or whatever. you know,
Yeah.
what are we going to do? Even though
Yeah.
that is something that is still it's hypothetical, and that is
Mhm.
something also that has happened. We've
Yeah.
used the nuclear weapons are not a
Yeah.
hypothetical.
Yeah.
Right.
The U.S. used those in World War II. We know exactly what that means. We have the technical capability. It's
Mm,
part of the war planning for every country. If it's not, it should be. And
mm.
yet, nobody's building nuclear bunkers. People are not going out and
I think some people are probably
taking
building
out.
nuclear bunkers.
Oh, you're right. You're right. No, there are people. You're right. There
They're
are
in New
some,
Zealand.
but that's right. But that's a fringe.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a fringe. And the irony is, some of those people building nuclear bunkers are Bitcoiners. But
Exactly.
Exactly.
but but that being said, it's really that's the thing. If you don't know how to assess those risks, it's really difficult to predict how people are going to react.
Mm.
And most people are not going to they're just not going to think about it.
Mm,
Unfortunately, that's how humans are. We don't really do that.
Again, I think the thing is that users shouldn't care about the technology. Again, going back to my day job, they shouldn't. To Mark's point, they won't, and that's in many ways a good thing. Yeah, if you have a reputable technology that can be used for things that are meaningful, then you shouldn't care about the technology. It should just handle it for you. I
mm,
guess the problem is, again, if we think about us behind the curtain that know more about this stuff, and I'm definitely not saying I know as much as you guys, but still, like a 51% attack, if there were the equivalent of a 51% attack in like fiat currency, like if you could somehow do a 51% attack against the dollar or something like that, there's obviously plenty of attacks against the dollar. Don't get me wrong, but and obviously the dollar has crashed as well. In the 2008 and whatever, we've had runs on currencies and stuff like that. But the government is always there to back you up, and you've got, well, as long as the government is still there, which most of the time it is, like it's still there to help you and bail stuff out, whether rights or wrongs of that aside, it's there. if there's a 51% attack against the Bitcoin blockchain, people are screwed because they can't do anything and there's no authority to help them because the math is the authority. And that puts you in a difficult situation. Now, again, it may be a very unlikely event, certainly in the case of Bitcoin. I think it has happened on other smaller sort of altcoins and stuff like that. But Bitcoin's a pretty big network now. I'm sure that it's much less likely on that. I know that there's lots of really centralized mining pools and farms and stuff around the world, but I'm sure that they're distributed enough to make that a very unlikely occurrence. But if it were to happen, everyone would be completely out of luck, right?
But Jason, you do not hold a fiat currency to the same standards as you are putting on Bitcoin. Because whenever your government prints more of your money, they are basically stealing your money. They are doing it slowly. The 51% attack happens every year. Like
Let
in
me tell you
certain
something
cases,
about.
more than that. Yes, please,
Let me
Mark.
tell you something about 51% attacks. We have a presidential election coming up soon. Okay, so
That is your 51%.
be careful about what the 51% do. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the UK it's always 52-48. It always falls out these days. It seems to be the magic number that keeps coming up. But no, I mean,
exactly.
I get it.
How'd you guys do with that 51% attack on the European Union?
Don't even start. But,
Sorry.
I'm still far less than 49% over that. But I think that. But you're right. So obviously, there obviously you have inflation and you have money printing and bailouts and all the horrible stuff that goes on in governments. And I think that's a really valid point. But at the same time, if again in the UK at least, if I lose up to something like £50,000 worth of my money, as long as the government's still there, it gives it back. Like I have that, whether that 50,000 is now worth 49,990 or something like that. That's a different question. But I don't lose it all like that. But now, actually, to be fair, I understand that with a 51% attack, you don't lose your old stuff necessarily. You just can't necessarily spend new stuff until it gets resolved. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but that's my understanding of it. And people that are doing the 51% attack can multiply spend their own coin, but I don't think you lose your own. So I guess it's not quite the same. But at the same time, it's because there's an authority for any government money, any fiat money. You've always got the chance. You've got some kind of recourse. And I'm not saying that in the grand scheme of things, governments are amazing because they obviously have their pluses and minuses. But with Bitcoin, you have no recourse. And I, again, feel that is something that would hit confidence from the average person on the street. Doesn't mean it's a bad technology for certain use cases, but it feels to me that that would be a problem for a lot of people.
Mark, I would want you to answer this question, and I would like to raise this point that people on the Bitcoin side of things, they need to walk a very fine line. They want to make a cryptocurrency which is very easy to use for people who don't really understand money, but should also stand the test and the scrutinies that come by having a technology behind it. Because fiat money was just given to us from above. It was more like, this is the currency that you guys are going to use. India used to be 563 different nation states, and all of them had their own separate currencies. And then Queen Victoria came and she was like, you will use shillings, but then we now have our like rupees. So you know how that works, right? There is some overarching body of which like gives you that thing. Bitcoin does not have that freedom. It has to stand the scrutiny, and it also has to be easy to use. How do you do that?
It's a tough one.
Bitcoin is tough, man. What can I say?
One of the things, and I'm still not sure if I'm settled on this argument, is that you don't need trust. And I think you said it at the beginning. You said there's no need for trust in a trustless network because the program will do what it's programmed to do. The algorithm will always do what it is programmed to do. And we know that because mathematically it has to. So that's where the trust comes in, is you trust the outcome. You trust that when you use Bitcoin, you will get the outcome you expect. Now, that you may not like some of those outcomes, and that's a choice that you need to make and you need to decide. But because the math is, I mean, it's math, it's done. The computer science behind it is rock solid. Then it just becomes a matter of engineering around that. And that's one thing that humans are really good at. We will jerry rig, we will experiment, we will tinker, we will tool, and we will find a way around the technological drawbacks and limitations. Or the technology will fail and it will not be adopted, which is possible. It's a non-zero chance that nobody will use Bitcoin in 5 years and cryptocurrency will remember it as this big bust. I don't think that's likely. I would be really surprised if that was the outcome. More likely, it's going to be the outcome that we've had with every technology going back to the wheel, which is somebody's going to say, hey, wheel's great for doing one thing. What if we do this? Then it can do something else. And the slow progress of technological innovation continues, and it continues to move. I don't have any evidence for that, but I know that human history has borne this out. We can see it in the actions and activities of millions of people and entrepreneurs and innovators, developers around the world on all sorts of other technologies. We're seeing it on Bitcoin too. Why should anybody believe that the outcome for Bitcoin should be any different than the outcome for any of these other technologies?
Got it.
Yeah, we don't know what's going to happen, and obviously that's I think you're right that, you know, in 5 years we could be looking at a massive success or a massive failure or somewhere in between, I think. But the interesting point there that actually I guess we haven't touched on yet is that, again, if we go back to my mum, I'm really going to have to buy her a present after this episode.
Same.
She's not going to look after her keys. You know, she's not going to want her own wallet. She's going to be using an exchange. And there's been a lot of really high profile exchange problems. And actually, in many ways, one of my objections to the exchange kind of approach, which I understand why it exists, and it obviously makes lots of things easier, but at the same time, you're just centralizing it again. And lots of those exchanges have been hacked in the past. And that doesn't necessarily engender kind of confidence in the system.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see how things go with these. We'll have to see how things go with the decentralized. We'll have to see how things go with the decentralized exchanges. There's also a regulatory approach for that. One of the things that's really interesting now is the exchanges now they still get hacked and nobody loses money anymore, because a lot of the exchanges now, all the legit ones, they have insurance. They're insured, and right now we have there's a cryptocurrency exchange that just got a banking license in the United States, Kraken. And the U.S. government has said that banks can custody cryptocurrency on behalf of customers. So what I think is Jason, to your point, you make a lot of great points, and I know I'm supposed to be trying to convince you, but I think it's just it's nice to be able to talk about these things in a constructive way. Is imagine just having your cryptocurrency wallet embedded in your banking app. Because that's the future that we're moving towards. Now, whether that will be the way of it, that the technology sticks and makes it mainstream, whether it's going to be one of these apps that I talked about earlier, whether it's going to be people, some other means, I would not bet against history. I would not bet against human innovation and the human desire to have things that they in the future that they don't have today. And what Bitcoin does is not only in terms of the proof of concept that you can send money to anybody, anywhere, anytime, in any amount, and know that it will get where it needs to go exactly as you intend. On top of that, on top of the core, and that's very specific to Bitcoin, but in a larger sense, the idea of cryptocurrency, where you have these open financial networks, anybody can plug into them, anybody can develop on them, build businesses and products, services, solutions on a global, open, permissionless. It's something comparable to a stack, and some of these things do market themselves as stacks. I think when you look at all those elements, how can you bet against that is I guess the question that I would put out to everybody. How could you bet against that?
Obviously, when we're talking about those stacks, we're starting to move more into kind of Ethereum type things and the kind of code is law kind of approach and smart contracts and stuff, which I don't know if we have time to cover today, but it's an interesting question. I think that I certainly have some questions about immutable code in immutable contracts and if then else type approaches to every problem. But I think you're right. More than anything, Mark, it's like wherever this goes, and it may go nowhere or it may go somewhere. I definitely don't underestimate the kind of the passion and the energy that people are going to put into it. So if there is a solution, I'm sure they'll find it. I guess the only wrinkle will be if there isn't a solution because of some fundamental, effectively flaw that just can't be overcome. And that would be a shame. Don't get me wrong. Again, I'm a tech guy. I want stuff like this to work. Don't get me wrong. I would love for it to work in a way that I would certainly love for it to work in a way that it's advertised. It doesn't feel like it does at the moment, and maybe it will more in the future, and that would be a fantastic thing. But I guess for me, the jury's still out. I'm still on the fence, sadly. But
so just to like add certain things over here, that code as law has never been seen in practice, be it Bitcoin or even like Ethereum.
Well, yeah, Ethereum deliberately didn't make it law, right?
Yeah, like Ethereum Classic is the guys
that's the law.
Who believe in code and law. And if
they've also got no money anymore because they lost it all in the DAO thing, right?
Yeah. And if I talk about Bitcoin, I guess Mark would know more. There was a time where somebody like illegally mined millions of Bitcoins via some hack or something like that. And that was rolled back. So we need to trust that people will always, like, although not all of them, but a majority of people will always try to do the right thing. Whether we like it or not, humans are quite altruistic that way. So even though we say that code is law, but when it comes to righting a wrong, we have always done the right thing.
But that does laugh in the face of immutability a little bit. I understand the point, and obviously these things have to be solved via consensus as well. So one guy couldn't just go and fork. Well, one guy could go and fork Ethereum, but no one else would care. But so to actually fork Ethereum and end up with the two Ethereums, you need to have a consensus amongst a certain selection of the community. So there's a certain kind of network effect there that's helped them right that wrong. And again, I guess I'm fine with that. But like any immutable system, which they can willfully, with enough votes, make mutable, feels slightly off. But again, I can completely understand why they did it. So I don't understand.
Still immutable though.
Yeah, one of it was, but the other bit muted off somewhere else. And that, again, I completely understand why they did that because of the horrors that happened at that point. So I'm not even going to criticize them for doing it, but it's still that, Ethereum Classic is effectively the continuation of that original chain. Right. And new Ethereum is now off, like having refunded some money in a way that shouldn't have been possible until enough people decided that it was possible. And that's fine as long as the number of people that need to decide that is a large number of very distributed people. Yeah. And I guess that is probably what happened. I don't know how many people voted each way, but that, again, I'm not going to impugn their motives because, to be honest, that was a hellish situation and they had to fix it as best they can. So in many ways, it was probably the right thing to do. But then when you see these people sitting there sort of extolling the virtues of immutable forever records and stuff like that, but that's not actually always true. It might be okay that it's not always true, but it still doesn't make it true.
So immutability does not mean like that it would not be flexible. Take our constitutions for the matter. Like the UK has a body of laws. It does not have a constitution per se, but India and the US have a constitution. So it is a body of laws that people follow, but it can be amended.
Yeah, and I get it.
Yeah,
I get it. It's again, I'm not even saying they did the wrong thing, but it's just and I guess as long as you have a big enough pool of people, it'd probably be okay.
Yeah.
But this is where and again, something we probably don't have time to talk about today, but when you get into the kind of private blockchains and stuff like that, where you probably don't have lots of people, that's where it starts to get a bit hairier. So that would probably be a different discussion for a different day.
No, definitely. Like private blockchains are a different beast altogether. We try to call them DLTs and distributed ledger technologies.
Yeah. But that's just a rebadging, though. That's the same thing. They just got a different name.
Yeah, like there are technical definitions as to why it is a DLT, why it's a blockchain. Like, you know more about it than I do. But I'd
No.
like to ask Mark some of these final questions as to what's next for Bitcoin. Like Lightning Network, we hear about it a lot, and the people behind it have one of like some of the smartest people over there. What's going on over there? What do you think would get Bitcoin into my banking account? Will I see it?
Oh,
My mom see it?
guys, the banks are going to get in your bank account. The banks are, because they know. I know people in banks, and they on the list of things that they worry about. Is it anywhere near the top? No, but it's an opportunity. But some of these guys, they see it as an opportunity, and they need to. Lightning Network, I don't know. I wish I could tell. I wish I knew exactly all the things that were going on. There's just so much activity. Even if I did, I'd miss something. I gotta get out of here pretty soon. Sorry to be rude about it. I would hate to say something on their behalf, but I think it would be awesome if we get together with one of the guys from there, like one of the guys working on strike, who's like a friend of a friend. So maybe, I don't know, but that would be great. That would be a whole great discussion, because it really is a really interesting technical solution to a real intractable problem that is really fundamental to Bitcoin. And if it works, that's going to be a really great payment platform. But you also have a lot of other cryptocurrency projects, altcoins, trying to do all sorts of other things. And you talked earlier about Ethereum. I think the whole idea of cryptocurrency governance is incredibly interesting. Not just crypto governments, but real governance over just people, and how this technology is going to be used in the real world. In 1996, the US government gave the internet to corporations. And next thing you knew, it was the biggest thing. And before then, it was the realm of universities and these kind of fringe, I shouldn't say fringe, because they were legit, they were businesses, they were publicly traded companies that were doing internet technology. But it wasn't this huge thing. But all these different hypotheticals, we just need to see how things work out. The possibilities and potentials are endless. They really are infinite. To project into the future, I think that would be a really interesting idea. But I'm not the guy to do that. I'm not the best person to do that. Oh, what do you guys think?
Jason is the guy with data. Yeah, please, Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't have data on that, sadly, but I think from my perspective, looking at just the kind of the way the winds are blowing, I think it's completely fair that as per both of your points, that there's going to be a lot of clever people working on this. There are obviously problems that we've all acknowledged with regards to kind of scalability and adoption. I would, again, as the geek in me, would love for those problems to be addressed, and if we can address them, I'm putting myself in the community all of a sudden, but if they can be addressed, then that would definitely be a thing that I would be fascinated by. And maybe I'll even try and get my bank to allow me to buy a Bitcoin at some point if I can afford it. But yeah, I think from my perspective at the moment, it still feels that, and this is something in my chat with David on the blockchain episode that I did, it's like there's lots of woulds and shoulds and coulds, and that's fantastic. Obviously, we need to be able to think in the future and think about possibilities. From my perspective, and probably my mum's perspective, and probably Utsav's mum's perspective as well, we're probably waiting for the does. And as soon as it does, I'm probably all in.
Slowly, then all at once.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Then
That's
all of a
how
sudden,
the heart works, by the way. It's all or it's none. But yeah, I'd like to end with this. Like, it's a lot similar to how people treat torrents. It's very easy for a lot of us who have been doing that. We know like how many seeders to look for, how many leechers to look for, whether the checksum checks out or not. We do it quite instinctively. Bitcoin people are a lot like that. They know what would check out, what would not check out, how to see the gas fees, what is this going to be, what is the value that they should go for, have they checked the address twice, have they prayed to their gods or whatnot. Understandable. But for people who don't understand torrents, it's very hard to explain. I cannot get into teaching my mom how to torrent things, right? I would just Tell me what you want. I'll do that. I'll shift it to Dropbox, send it to you.
Yeah, by the way, I think you've just admitted to a crime, so you might want to cut that bit out.
I'm in India. I'm in India.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I understand like piracy is bad and I do not condone it. HackerNoon does not condone piracy. Yeah.
Cool.
So there's it. Thank you, Jason, and thank
No.
you, Mark, for being on the HackerNoon podcast. We were very happy to have you guys on board. And if you guys have any final things to say to the HackerNoon readers, now would be the time. Jason, why don't you go first?
No, obviously, I love HackerNoon, the site, and the podcast. So I'm really happy to have had the chance to contribute. If anyone wants to come and listen to my horrible voice talking about product management, feel free to pop across.
How about you, Mark?
All right, now it's my turn to plug.
There you go.
Plug anyone.
My turn to show. Okay.
Buy Mark's books. Buy Mark's books.
Oh yeah. That's a good start.
Vote for him at the Noonies.
Oh, vote for, hey, you guys. I'll let you guys do it. Go, keep going. There's one other thing that I would recommend people check out. Crypto is Easy newsletter. Crypto is Easy is what it's called. It's a lot more focused on like the markets and investing, making money off of cryptocurrency. And then what a lot of the stuff that I write for HackerNoon and a lot of these other publications is more about the technology and more about the stuff that we're talking about here.
I will definitely subscribe.
Definitely, and there is some crypto behind it too.
Yeah, I hope
dude. Well, I want to first start by thanking Stripe for working with me on this. But one of the things so Stripe runs basically my newsletter. So in order to get paid subscription, I use Stripe as the payment processor because the service that I use uses Stripe as their payment processor. I have no choice in the matter. If I want to use that newsletter service, I have to use Stripe. And I hope Stripe, I'm sure they're fine with me saying this, but one of the things that I would do when people sign up is I would say as a thank you, I would give them a little bit of Bitcoin. And in one of their manual reviews, that got flagged for Stripe as like a high risk activity. We worked it all out, but that's what I was talking about before. So because they were going to shut me down, they were like, "Oh, you can't use crypto," and then, we worked it out. They were really great about it. I actually give them a lot of credit for understanding where I was coming from and appreciating that I wasn't. So it was misunderstanding, and we worked it out.
Yeah, glad to hear that. So with that, we would like to call it a wrap. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Mark, for being on the HackerNoon podcast.
Great, thanks. It was a pleasure.
Have a great one.
All right, take care, guys.
You too. Bye.